Well, the thing is, you see, with all this technology and all that, I'm just about knowledgeable enough to do it, but
Yeah.
I'm on the edge of my competence, you know. So I have to just be very careful what I do.
Guy, I don't think you're alone there. I think most of us operate in that sort of fuzzy gray area,
Yeah,
especially now.
I'm a hell of a lot better at it than a lot of other people, but not half as good at it as I'd like to be. Do you know
Oh,
what I
yeah,
mean?
me too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It suffices for me.
It really is. So on that note, I'm gonna get us going, Wendy.
Okay, cool.
Great. So, Wendy, it's fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you, Guy. It's awesome to be here, and I look forward to us rifting away.
I know. Well, we've said we'll rift and see where it takes us. But I've done a little intro. I always say that when I start these things, and so obviously I know who you are, and I've just introduced you to the audience. But it would be great just to get a sense of what it is that you do, what it is that you're inverted commas known for by those that know you, and
Mhm.
then we'll kind of kick it off from there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Um, I think I want to start with my company, which I created in 2012. It's called Speak Out, Speak Up. And the purpose of the company really comes out of my own whistleblowing experience. So I think in a very public way, people might know me as the whistleblower for the biggest corporate collapse in South Africa's history, which is also known as South Africa's Enron. And after I secured justice in that particular case, it took me 11 years, by the way, and I had this burning curiosity. So a bit like you, Guy, where my curiosity is one of the behaviors that ignites me to drive forward. And I really had some burning questions around about what the hell just happened? How come it's so difficult to speak up to abuses of power? How come it's so difficult for power to listen up to a subordinate speaking truth? And what is it about the human condition that we close ranks against this person speaking truth to power? And that set me up on a journey where I started engaging with eminent social scientists around the world. I was sponsored to go to Berkeley in the States and then to Stanford. And out of that, I then created Speak Out, Speak Up. And the primary purpose there is not advocacy for whistleblowing, because it's a treacherous journey. It's incredibly arduous. And it is harmful for both the individual speaking up, but also for the organization, even though the person has good intentions about speaking up in the public interest. There are very natural psychological conflicts that invoke people's default to shut people down because it's done in secret when you're whistleblowing. You do it anonymously most of the time. And so really from my studies and my experience, I want to train individuals to be able to speak up and listen up through something called courageous conversations. And this is before anybody needs to go and knock on the door of the whistleblowing department. So how do we not only have the language of courageous conversations and say, guys, I need you to speak up if there's a problem in our company. This is part of our mission statement. These are our values. And how do we actually embed and bake in those behaviors? Because you know what? It's not an easy thing to do. And I'm not just talking about organizational context. It's the conversation you have with your family. It's the conversation you have with your neighbor about boundaries and the tree that you want to chop down. It's asking for a raise. It's saying no to somebody in need. And it's about how do we navigate with curiosity and a beginner's mindset so that we learn about our conversational partner instead of wanting to teach them what we know only. And, that's really my mission. That's really my purpose. And that's the purpose of Speak Out, Speak Up. So I hope that encapsulates a little bit of the work that I do.
Yeah, and that's what that's what attracted me to reach out to you, and you graciously said yes, you'd come on the episode, the podcast. And I love that phrase, truth to power.
Yeah, it's a difficult one though.
Yeah, it's easy to say, right, and easy to put on
Yep.
a t-shirt, but
Yes.
it's something I noticed, that it doesn't matter if you're the CEO speaking to the chairman of the board or whatever it might be. It could be hierarchical, it could be positional, it could be psychological, it doesn't matter. Power, it takes many guises, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I do. I think we'll kind of come back to this, and I think very much so, because that's why you're on the episode.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to lead us down a great conversation. I think before we get into that, almost the dynamics of what you're doing right now, you did obviously allude to, some of the sort of what you're known for. It was LeisureNet, I think, wasn't it? And
That's correct. Yes.
etc. But
yes.
there was a pre-LeisureNet as well. So almost, how did you get to maybe this position? That's what you're doing, but how did you get here? And I want to be careful when it comes to that experience, but there's, because we could probably spend about 2 days of an episode on that, I'm sure. But I think it might be worth just people hearing an element of that story, that said, when we get to that part of the story where your brain went, Houston, we have a problem. And some of the stepping stones that you had to go through. So I'll hand the baton back to you to maybe do the story, bring that particular one to life, and then get us up to present day.
Sure. Thanks, Guy. I really want to start with my childhood, really, and my family dynamic, because I think we are taught in our lives that people become successful in a very linear fashion. That we start here, we're ambitious, we get supported, and we have role models, and then bash, boom, we're suddenly a successful individual. I want to really knock that on the head and disrupt that complete notion. A lot of people will expect that because I spoke up to powerful people, that I had this moral, I had moral role models in my family dynamic that created this part of my character. And I want to share with people that's quite the opposite. In fact, my family dynamic was really fraught with what we would call narcissistic triangulation. I was the scapegoat in that family dynamic. And rather than coming from a place of empowerment and positivity, the positioning of me in the family dynamic as being the scapegoat really gave me voice later on in my life. But often when we're growing up, we don't really consciously understand the power within some of the fragmented parts of ourselves. There's power in that. And so I just want to park that there, because it's an important part of my story.
And when you say power in being being the scapegoat gave you a voice?
Yes. In a narcissistic, no, the narcissistic triangulation, you normally have one parent who's narcissistic, who has a golden child. And then the other children or other child becomes the scapegoat or the invisible child.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter what you do as an invisible child or the scapegoat, you are never good enough, because you cannot compete with the golden child. So it's sort of kind of out of a dark place. It's coming from a darker place. But as the invisible child, the scapegoated child, I always had a desire to have my voice heard. I also had a drive to prove, and it was driven by a sense of needing validation in the family dynamic, that I became incredibly ambitious and quite driven. And this is quite a normal pathology in very successful people. So if you look at someone like Steve Jobs, we only see him as a successful individual that he was, but in fact, there were some fragmented pieces of his psyche that got him there. And I think this is an important part of sharing to other people that are perhaps struggling in life, that you're in a journey, this is not the end game. Some of these darker parts, some of the broken parts of ourselves can actually drive us into very powerful, empowered characteristics later on in our lives. One of the very positive things in my life was I became a ballet dancer very early on. And that's because from an ancestral, of course. And it's very interesting because when I go right back to my ancestry, my great-grandmother was a performer. And she had her own troupe of singers and dancers that used to dance in the Prince's Theatre in Manchester. And her stage name was Kitty Shaw. And yeah, it's amazing. And she then passed on that to my grandmother, who was a dancer for the Royal Ballet, and to my mother, who was a dancer for the Royal Ballet. So whilst living in South Africa, my mother very kindly passed the baton to me. And I became this prima ballerina in the ballet company in South Africa. And you know, it was incredibly disciplined, hard work, you know, to become that.
Yes.
And there was a period of time, I was sort of 19, 20, when I was off injured. And my parents approached me and asked me if I'd like to become an accountant. And to this day, I don't know what the bridge is between ballet. I
don't know why I'm laughing, but it's made me laugh.
Everybody laughs because it's so bizarre. Maybe there's something about creative accounting in there. I'm not quite sure, you know, but it gave me this ability to sort of pivot and not stand still. The flexibility of a mindset, the agility, the resilience to go from one thing to another without taking huge jetés or massive pirouettes. There were tiny little sort of movements towards change. So I took them up on their offer, became this accountant. And just to set the stage, we're talking about South Africa, it's the 1980s, an incredibly macho social dynamic. And for anyone to be a sort of academic or qualified woman, it was quite unusual. And so again, the sense of ambition, again, looking for validation. I rose through the ranks of various companies and found myself at LeisureNet Ltd as the only female executive in my group of executives, reporting directly into the board of directors. And I was operating as the international group treasurer. And LeisureNet, the company itself, was a multinational. So we operated all over the world. It was called the darling of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So a very much loved company. And also in the South African context, there was a lot of pride around this company. And a lot of South Africans are incredibly patriotic as well. There's a real sense of pride that a company like that could be doing such good work around the world. And it was a health and leisure company. So it was only that we had the IMAX theaters, the Planet Hollywoods, and various other bits and pieces under the umbrella. And I remember, you know, in my 30s, feeling a sense of arrival. And I even remember thinking, gosh, I've got a leather lounge suite in my office.
I've cracked it.
I've arrived. This is my arrival. And this is, here's the thing. It's like, no, we never simply arrive in life. You know, there are always much richer chapters that are going to need a title further along in our lives. And if we feel or we believe we've arrived, we rob ourselves of our true evolving, our true becoming later on in life. But I as a 30-year-old, I thought this is pretty cool. And I worked in that company for 9 years. So, you know, I would stomp around the corridors and I felt very empowered, and especially as a woman. And then after about 9 years, I was asked to transfer hundreds of millions offshore into a Jersey bank account. Now, again, this notion of we went from year 1 to year 9 and everything was cool and wonderful in between, that's not so. It also didn't go from a company where there were monsters and unethical people roaming the corridors waiting to rob the public listed company. Not at all. We were a really good company founded on good governance. But the crux of the matter was nobody would speak up to the very dynamic founders of the company, who later became the joint CEOs of the company when we listed. And really, that was the fracture within the company. So we deferred our power to them. We, they were great as entrepreneurs, but maybe they weren't so great reporting into a board of directors. And I feel that the joint CEOs, who were my friends as well as my colleagues, really lost their independence. They felt that they had created this company. They were heroes. We had a great big halo around the company. But they really resented reporting into a board of directors that they felt didn't have the special talents that they had had. And this sense of loss of independence, the loss of their special talents, or the diminishing of that, mattered to them a lot. And so I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I feel that they then began to try and grab back their own self-concept in terms of the founders, being the founders of this wonderful company, and started being, yeah.
There's an identity thing here, isn't it? It's that loss of identity. It's not about the money at this point.
Yeah.
I'm rich enough.
Yeah.
This is about when I'm with my peers in the world, I want to be the person that I now have portrayed myself as, or I'm being told I am.
Yes.
And actually, maybe I never really defined myself that way, but now I am being defined in that way. I quite like it.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, Guy. It's this notion of, which we all are vulnerable to, of self-preservation and loss. And, we often just compartmentalize loss as, loss of life. But loss, we will do most anything to avoid loss in our lives, whether it's loss of status, whether it's loss of mainly our self-concept, so who we believe ourselves to be, and who other people make us feel. So this narrative or this mindset around grabbing back that was, I think, what drove them to start taking shortcuts, start, shooting from the hip, very cowboy fashion, and starting to really be incredibly dishonest and doing lawful but awful behavior, which then cascaded into illegal behavior.
It's fascinating. I've got two little things that jump into my mind when you talk about it. One is that people kind of fall in love with their own caricature a little bit.
Sure.
They like the identity, but also very often those, people that create companies at that level are not cut from the normal template.
Sure.
I know quite a few entrepreneurs, and they're up at 4, and they're working till 4, and they're built of a different thing. And there's an adrenaline, there's a risk, they like bobbing and weaving, ducking and diving, and the status quo doesn't appeal to them. They actually almost enjoy the risk of absolute failure.
Absolutely.
It's a very interesting paradigm, those kind of behaviors.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And the thing is that I think also the tendency for these people to be great is there, but the tendency also is for them to ignore risk and peril. And I think, we, not just as employees, but also part of the community of societies we live in the world that we live in now, that we are all responsible to be able to speak up in moments and go, hey, I think you've missed this risk. Can I let you show what might happen if we go down this route, if we go with your decision? And so it's all up to us. That we've learned this narrative of who am I to say anything? Well, who are you not to say anything? And I think we have a greater responsibility to be able to say to people in power, because they are also fallible, they are also vulnerable. And so we need to take the responsibility to bring things to their attention
That's
in,
the
in a constructive way, in a helpful way.
yeah. Yeah, that's the
Yeah, and
Marion Wilson kind of you're playing small does not serve the world.
absolutely beautiful. Yes, it is. It's exactly that. And again, this contagion of, going back to Marion Williamson, this contagion of, by speaking up or stepping into your own light, I think she says.
You enable others to find theirs. Yeah.
You give permission to others to do the same.
Yeah.
Incredibly contagious. But it takes the outlier, it takes the disruptor, it takes the dissenter, the person that perhaps has a little bit of different experience to be able to have that conversation. It's incredibly fraught with conflict, because of course, and I'm talk from my own experience, but also from my research and also working with people in this field, that when you want to speak up and listen up, by the way, you are also putting your self-concept on the line, because the thought occurs to us in those moments of friction. What if I have this conversation and something pops up about who they believe I am that I don't find tasteful? How will I respond to that? Because our default is going to defend who we are. That's going to become the primary conversation piece. It's not going to be about the conversation anymore. It's going to be about, how dare you say that about me? And so most of us avoid having these conversations precisely because our self-concept might be challenged.
And I do think there's at a base level, there's a kind of, people never refer to Maslow anymore, which I think is a great shame, because it's old hat. But that baseline of I fear the loss of a job, and I feel the loss of a financial income, and so that is my self-validity. But then there might be that inherent primal fear of roof overhead, and those two things together, my fear to protect and provide, or not to be, which is my personal validation, to survive in the world. Then put those two together and you can very quickly end up in a submissive space, because I want to protect that. So listen, when you went into this moment, I mean, you're using the definitely the language of education. You've educated yourself greatly in this area and space. But
thank you.
Back when it happened, did you know what you were getting into?
No, not at all. Right. And this is a very common thread for anybody that ends up being a whistleblower. And so, first of all, I had never heard of the word whistleblower. I really thought I was doing my job as the international group treasurer for a public listed company, poised to list on the London and Australian Stock Exchange. It was really, I need to do this. And my first port of call wasn't external. And I think, again, I want to remind anyone listening that most whistleblowers don't go to the media. They don't go to the regulator. They want to resolve the problem internally. And so in just such a fashion, I remember thundering down the corridor to speak to the joint CEOs. And I remember thundering. It was like I had a fly in my ear and I was a bull on the rampage. And that fly buzzing in my ear represented all the emotions of frustration, suspicion, anger, anxiety about the conversation I was going to have with them. And I remember thinking and acknowledging I wasn't really masterful in having this conversation. I wasn't really skilled in having these kind of conversations. I had a lot of skin in the game, and you alluded to it in terms of, hey, I was a single parent. I wanted a roof over my head firstly, and I wanted a job. But I thought I was doing them a favor by bringing their potential illegal transaction to their attention and what it might mean for the company.
Risk,
huge risk, and it was illegal. And
And there's
yeah,
that, right?
there's that. And you know, I remember thundering in, and you know, again, absolutely no skill in having a narrative, no roadmap, a huge emotional dump, and naturally, they responded by reminding me of my own vulnerability as a single parent and their power. And I was quickly marched out of the offices. And I remember thinking, wow, that didn't really go well. Maybe I'll try the financial director and the legal counsel, who were both, and again, all these people were not monsters. You know, they weren't bad people, but they all shut me out effectively. And I remember going to my very plush office with my leather lounge suite. And it occurred to me really very profoundly that I was being met with a moral dilemma. It was, why should I speak out? Again, this very natural, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Why should I be the person? I'm the only woman on the team. I'm a single parent. Maybe let somebody else do this. This is not, you know, I'm at more risk and more vulnerable than anybody else. Why should it be me? And it was also, you know, my job is important to me. And then there was a sort of very nebulous crossover where my own internal dialogue turned into the possible future dialogue of my son, who was 12 at the time. And I imagined him as a 20-year-old, maybe, yeah, you know, saying to me, Mom, you were this big honcho at LeisureNet, and there was a massive scandal there. What part did you play in that scandal? And this is where there was massive conflict for me. You know, I think as parents, we want to be good role models to our children naturally. And yeah.
Well, you've done something there which I utilize with execs when I do my work, which is, what is it that you can use as a lever to do what it is that you in your heart already know the answer to?
Yes.
And my example is, if one of my boys was watching me in real time on a video stream, one of these documentaries, and if he had his friends with him,
Yeah.
and they were all watching me now, would he be going, oh God?
Yes.
Or would he be going, that's my dad, that is?
Yes.
And find the lever,
Yes.
because then it'll make you, I think Jack Nicholson in that film, You Make Me Want to Be a Better Person.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
it'll make you be a better person, right? And
Yes.
that's for you. That is a beautiful example of that internal lever.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yes.
you have to self-apply so your own fear doesn't put you back in your own box.
Absolutely. And it really is, you know, working with that. And, you know,
Yeah.
the longer lever you have, the more leverage you have. You know, it's like opening that tin of paint. You know, if you don't have the right screwdriver to pop open that lid, you're not going to leverage that lid open and let all the good stuff out. And it was really a very profound long-term vision of what he might say to me. And that then catalyzed my thinking in terms of, can I think beyond my employment contract to my social contract to humanity? Is there something greater here at stake than just securing my job?
And can I ask, were you actually, is that, I mean, maybe not the exact words, but to paraphrase,
Yes.
is that the conversation you were actually having with yourself at the time?
You know, it was more of an emotional conversation. And
Okay.
what I've done, obviously, over the years,
You've
I've
put the words to it.
I put a narrative to it
Right.
so that
Okay.
I can share it effectively.
Yeah, I get it.
But I think there was a great sense of, I've got to look beyond now. I've got to look beyond now. And also, I think as I'm talking to you, I'm also acknowledging how pivotal my own ancestors have been in my behavior. I am able to look back at my ancestors and what they were and what they became and their struggles. And I'd done that work a long time before I was in this position I'm talking about. The sense of, what's my legacy? Who am I? I might be this now, but who can I be then? And that was the tipping point that allowed me to pick up the phone and then make an external anonymous phone call to the South African Exchange Control Board. And the reason I did that was because we had a very strong legal caveat with them. And, you know, that wasn't an easy conversation. And again, I wasn't blowing the whistle. I was picking up the phone to say, hey, am I right in thinking if I transferred this money to Jersey, this would be illegal? That's all I want. I want confirmation. I want to know if I'm right or wrong on this. And they said, absolutely, you'd be breaking the law. Come in for a conversation with us. And I remember considering this and thinking a definite no, because their board of directors played golf with our board of directors.
Of course
So
they did.
I wasn't there. Now, unbeknown to me, this is the year 2000, and South Africa had just incorporated the King's Commission of Corporate Governance. And again, I don't know this for certain, but I think there was a very strong desire in South Africa to do the right thing and to have strong corporate governance. And so when I made this phone call, the South African Exchange Control Board felt that it was their duty to immediately investigate. There was no in between. Well, let's flesh this out. Could we have a further
perfect situation at the perfect time, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they traced the call and did a dawn raid on the company's premises within sort of 7 to 10 days. And very quickly, I was identified as they wouldn't have called me a whistleblower, they would have called me a rat, a snitch, various other horrible things, and fired. So here I was, yes, having lost my job, having lost my livelihood. But what was worse was because of the death threats that followed, there was a potential for me to also lose my life and the life of my son. And, you know, I want to pause there because when I share my story internationally as an international speaker, I do prepare people with sort of by setting the stage, because I know that when I tell my story, a lot of people will defend their own positions by saying, oh, but that's in South Africa. That would never happen here. Or that, you know, that is in a South African company, that would never happen in our company. And I want to say to people, you're wrong on both scores. It does happen, it is happening. The final comment I want to make about that before, and if we move forward, is that a lot of people also, because of their self-concept, will default to thinking, so what, that's not such a big deal that she spoke up. I would too, because I'm a good moral person. And maybe that's correct. And I really, really hope that by thinking you know yourself enough, that you would be able to navigate this difficulty. But I also want to add that there's a reason there's only one Schindler and one Schindler's List, because it's difficult to speak up to abuses of power. This is not an easy thing to do. And we need to train around that. And I think, you know, in our life, we don't ever, you know, become something without preparing. We don't become a chartered surveyor without studying.
Yeah.
We don't, you know, and why don't we do this to speak and listen up to? We need to create the preparation for this.
So there's a couple of things there for me. I mean, one is I think it depends a lot. There's a lot of variables in the human being. And, you know, you've just got a new house and you've just got a new baby and you're financially on the edge, but you'll be fine in due course. But, you know, and then something happens and you go, and you're just in COVID and the market's not very good, but you have a secure job and you think, well, if I do say anything, how the hell am I going to get a job? And I've got to, so some people that wouldn't matter. They do it anyway. And others, the context they're in would shift their dynamic. Or later on in life, I'm financially secure, my mortgage is paid off. Well, I'm not having this.
Yes.
You know, so there's a load of variables about intellectually, we would all help somebody that was being mugged.
Yes.
but then you might go, well, actually, the mugger might stab me.
That's right.
So
Yes.
it's all intellectually, we all, very few people would say I wouldn't do the right thing. But so I
Yes.
think there is that. And I think then there's something about it's too varied a set of truths to presume that just saying it's okay would mean it's okay. What I've heard
Sure.
you say there is there has to be a psychological safety, there has to be a proven safety
Mm. Mm.
of, saying things with malice will be dealt with accordingly. But if
Yes.
they come with the right intent in the right place, then we're putting the work in prior to the event that may never happen,
Yes. Yes.
but you know that, or you believe that it would be okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because we're very visual creatures, we go on what we see and not what others say.
Yes.
So where is the demonstration that I will be safe? Have I seen it? I might have heard, tone at the top saying it's all good, but have I seen it being demonstrated before? It's very, very important. When we build climates,
Yes.
it's what's visible and how that's interpreted. Because again, the complexity of ourselves as human
Yes.
beings is how we interpret that too.
And I think at the most simple, at a meeting, if my idea is shot down, well, if my idea is shot down on that, if you think I'm bringing anything big to the table, if that's what happens
Yes.
when I just suggest that we should paint the car park blue instead of orange,
Yes. I'm not going there.
and I'm definitely not going for anything bigger than that. So the proof,
Absolutely.
the evidence is in my everyday experience
Yes.
of how either debate or disagreement, or just call it curiosity. It doesn't have to be challenge.
Yes.
One of the things I use, let's not start with challenge, let's start with curiosity, right?
Brilliant. Yes.
But if curiosity is rejected, then I'm definitely not going for challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to escalate it, right?
Yeah.
And and also this, talking about this sort of contagion and this sort of you're creating the ripples before there's the tsunami. You want to be embedding the ability to bring innovative ideas, and even if it's not a even if it's not a good idea, and you've offered something up that's a bit jerky and outside what everybody's expecting. People ask themselves, what is the listening up I'm speaking up to? And if that person listening up, the leader, shuts you down with a narrative or even a micro expression, rolling eyes to the sky is a beautiful one.
Yeah.
It's incredibly off-putting, and everybody sees it. We all take note of those things. And so instead, it's about saying to that individual who may have offered a jerky idea to be able to thank them, articulate, thank you for taking the time, for bringing that to my attention. And maybe that's something we can deliver or look at later on. And it's not something we're looking at right now. So it's that narrative of appreciation, humility. It's humility and volunteering, the vulnerability that you don't know everything, even though you're in a leadership position.
So it's supporting the intent, even if I don't support the idea.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. There are times when I'm going to go in my brain, new,
Yes.
but you might have a brilliant one tomorrow. So I want to support the intent.
That's right. And I want to also nurture this person's curiosity. I want to harness this person's propensity to bring these sometimes wacky ideas to the table. But one day this person might have a wonderfully wacky idea that could really support the company's purpose or our group or our team's purpose.
Wendy, somebody once said to me, well, a lot younger, and it was one of those perfect moments when I went, oh, stupid idea. And they went, no, guy, what is it? And I went, oh, it's a rubbish idea. And they rather brilliantly said the phrase, guy, at this moment in time, your rubbish idea is better than everybody else's no idea.
Absolutely brilliant.
It was just that way of encouraging me to volunteer something that may be ridiculous, as you say, maybe might be the next big idea, but if it,
Yeah,
etc. But it's that
yeah.
willingness to accept, which I thought was, I didn't quite get it at the time, but retrospectively I thought, oh, that was genius.
Yeah, fantastic, great leadership. And I also think there's a conversation to be had about how we educate leaders. How do we support our leaders? You know, I think leaders are often put in positions and not given the investment, the training to be the good leaders they can be. There's a sort of notion of being trained as a leader to solve problems and to fix issues, and to know it all.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it takes, again, huge amounts of courage and humility to actually say, I actually don't have all the answers.
So to work with you, Wendy, you know, if an organization was, the story in itself is a great story. I think it's a catalyst. It's a reason to pay attention. It's, you know, there's a whole host of things in that.
Thank you.
And there's an education in that story and your willingness to offer it. Then there's something about the experience maybe of working with you that goes beyond the story itself. And
Yes.
what is that? Why would an organization knock on your door? And what is, you know, we can all do things, but what is your sweet spot where you go, this is why you would call upon me. This is how I would enable or help or develop. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks again for validating my journey. When companies do work with me, there's a number of ignitions for them. So it might be about training their organization and everybody within a certain level of their organization to have informal conversations that are driven through courage. So something as simple as feedback has become fraught with tension, because we all have our internal narratives and we have our self-concepts at risk, both as the receiver of feedback and also the giver of feedback. So what's worked in the past for organizations is for me to go in and to actually train teams and individuals in terms of how do we provide informal feedback every day, so that it's not once a year, kind of that really awful form that we all have to fill in and go through this awful conversation which nobody really cares about, and it's fraught with tension. So how do we build the narrative, the roadmap around having learning conversations rather than having right and wrong conversations? What are the narratives? What are the words? What are the body languages? What are the micro expressions that we can do to help that become a growing experience rather than just a polarized opposite kind of conversation, a linear conversation. We want to be circular in these conversations. So feedback is one of them. The other one is, I have been really worried and concerned that organizations have defaulted to the concept of, if we get a hotline, a whistleblowing hotline in our organization, we now suddenly have an open culture. No, not at all. In fact, in some organizations, people will believe, because they only have a whistleblowing hotline, that the actual organization is a very closed organization, that the only way you can have a conversation, whether it's about malfeasance or whether it's about there being no toilet paper on the third floor toilets, I can only go to the hotline to let people know about that, because everybody's so fraught with fear and insecurity. So hotlines are not gold. Hotlines are barren land. You have to dig for the gold. And so what works for organizations that work with me is being able again to build the language, the narrative, the roadmap around having daily informal conversations around possible unethical behavior, possible unethical practices that have happened in the organization, and stopping them at that point, investigating them informally at that point, rather than it heading down the slippery slope, and 9 years later you've got a Wendy Addison popping up going, I'm actually going to phone externally to see if this is an issue. So it really is saying that courageous conversations is before the ethical slippery slope. It's informal. It's less expensive in the long run, both from a financial point of view, but also from a reputational point of view. Whereas whistleblowing might seem the right tick box to have in your organization right now, but it's very short term and it can be very expensive in the long term. And there's also something about diversity and belonging and contribution. So again, you know, there's a big push around the notion of diversity and belonging. But there's another piece about that. It's about contribution. And speaking up and listening up is about contributing. And it shouldn't matter what gender you are, what race you are, you know, whether you're in a wheelchair, what world experience you have, the more diversity, the better. But how do we get people to contribute to a diverse team when they have their own internal dialogues going on that prevent them from doing
about
that?
their position and their relationship with power and
absolutely, and their self-concept as being different.
it's I deal with some of my clients are in the construction industry, and health and safety is an interesting one, because if you're not in the construction industry, health and safety is just one of those things that you go, I don't know, don't lick an electrical current. I mean, you
Yes.
don't think about it very much, but when you're in the construction industry, it's front and foremost. And the training on it is not complex, but the
Yes.
relationship with seniority and seeing something that's not safe,
Yes.
and the willingness to, in theory, I'm 18, it's my first day on site, something looks wrong, who am I to say anything?
Exactly.
And the first thing they work on is, look, it probably won't be that difficult for you to realize what's safe or not. The issue you're going to have is with your relationship with positional power, and who are you, young, new, whatever it might be,
Yes.
to actually go, excuse me. And if your line manager goes, it's not a problem, and you go, it looks like a problem to me, I'm sure those pointy things aren't supposed to be doing that, you know, then where would you then, oh, well, I don't have the right, or I'm not, to then go above that. So their issue isn't with, can you spot danger?
Yeah.
Their issue is with whether or not you'll actually raise the alarm on it.
Yes. And whether leadership can listen to you, you know, without, you know, thinking, gosh, I should have noticed that. Now, all of a sudden, my self-concept as a leader, as a supervisor, as a manager, is at risk because this young 18-year-old has come to tell me about that. And in fact, he's rattled my cage a little bit. So I'm just going to keep that quiet.
And I think that was, and I think now we have an industry that, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, if you're 60 years old, you're a seasoned veteran, but you do not want to be the person whose site went wrong. So they have this massive encouragement of, listen, I'm not asking you, I'm begging you.
Yes.
If you see a problem, for the love of all things sacred, tell me. And they have they've done that work to get rid of the machismo, and for senior people to feel it's their duty that everybody goes home safe. That, you know, so they've done that work. And I'm sure the odd site where that's not, but the majority of places I go to, it's culturally inherent. You know, it's in the DNA now. It's taken them a decade or so to get there, but by heck, they've got there.
That's so good to hear. And you know, I think just looking at our politicians at the moment, I think there's some work that can be done there in the sort of machismo. I'm not vulnerable. I mean, I never get sick. You know, even if I'm sick, I'm working through all of this. And so it really is talking about sort of the humility, and there's a bigger piece around this as well, and it's an evolving piece that I also want to mention, is that there's a big drive now around ESG investing. So this investment portfolio managers, wealth managers, are really being encouraged, and this is going to be regulated by next year, to be able to invest people's wealth into companies that have an ESG, not just a mission statement, but they're demonstrating that they are doing, their purpose of their organization is for the good of society and not just for the shareholders. that the purpose of the organization is for all stakeholders, not just for shareholders.
Right.
So the evolving mindset around this, which I feel dovetails very neatly with the public interest laws and whistleblowing. So people blow the whistle legitimately under public interest laws. So we do it because there's a public interest issue. And this fits very neatly with ESG investments. And so it's really, I think there's a great opportunity to repackage and remarket the concept of speaking and listening up.
Yes.
Because people who have money want to make more money. They want to invest in a company that does notice the plug with all the wires sticking up. They don't want to have their money in a company like that might blow up. They don't want to invest in a company who digs up half of Nigeria because there's oil there. They are now looking to invest their money in companies and organizations whose purpose considers all of society and the planet.
It's that triple bottom line.
Yes. And so it's almost like by stealth.
Yeah.
The mindset, or for me, the drive to invite organizational leaders to be trained for courageous conversations is becoming more and more natural, because organizations are going to be indexed and valued according to what their ESG rating is. And ESG investment portfolio managers are going to be asking for the whistleblowing reports and what happened to the whistleblower. So,
okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So it's kind of not being driven by a negative that somebody's speaking up because something's wrong. It's being driven by, I want to make more money. I also want to look after the planet. So there's an opportunity here, I think, for organizations who at the moment, maybe in their mission statement, are talking about doing well and doing good.
There's a shift here in I deal with private equity organizations as well.
Okay, right.
And so there is something that's different between maybe a utilities company that are digging holes so the water pipes are fixed and kept running, and they have these 7-8 year contracts, and they're thinking long term, etc. And then you're on a 3-year earnout on another kind of enterprise. And I know it's probably we're squeezing everybody a bit hard, but as one person said, I can be a good guy after this.
yeah, exactly.
And so the context of what gets rewarded gets done, and etc. And all these different things come into it. And there is this focus for me now on how does the CEO or the board create a comfort or a reality within themselves of, actually, it's not so much that's the wrong thing to do, it's illegal, which is a standout issue, but actually as a kind of as a gateway to illegality is the pressure that we put on ourselves,
absolutely,
where the commercial imperative is the only driver.
Yes.
And what is the reality of us turning around and going, well, we could have made more this year.
Yes.
However, what we did was.
Yes.
And that's the conversation, I think, that we're all probably very interested as to what's the dynamic of that really going to play out as.
Yeah, I agree, Guy. I think it's with climate change and COVID, COVID has reminded us that businesses are human institutions. All of this is coming together in a great petri dish of saying this is opportune to having these conversations, and really going back to my own unconscious at the time emotional feeling of, can I look beyond just my employment contract to my social contract? And I think 20 years later, I'm delighted to be talking about the social contract. Yes. And I think organizations are coming on board with that and going, yes, do we stop issuing plastic bags but plastic bags give us some kind of income. which gives us better dividends to our shareholders. But do we think beyond the straitjacket of the shareholder and think about all stakeholders? And this is an evolving piece, I think. But what I'm loving is the people that are driving this and the positioning around it, and how organizations are desperately or it seems to be the sort of a desperate intention to get on board with that. So I'm looking forward to how this conversation continues as we go forward, and to be part of that conversation.
So, time is cruel. So I'm alert to the fact that with a bottle of vino and a curry in front of me, you and I would just keep talking, or I would keep talking. I keep talking anyway, and you politely listen. So just for me, as we kind of bring this to a close, which has been, I think, a fascinating kind of overview and insight into you and where your energy goes. Two things for me. If people wanted to reach out to you, where's the best place to do that? Or what's the best route to that? And I can put that in the links below, but it'd be good to understand where that is.
Okay, so thanks for that invitation. If people want to reach out to me, they can go to my website, which is speakout-speakup.org. And yeah, I'd be very grateful if you could put that in the links there.
Yeah, definitely will do.
Yeah, and there's a blog there that I write most months about my thinking on things as they pop up. Yeah, various bits and pieces. My service offerings are on the website too, so they can drill through that. And of course, just give me a shout out. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, all the various social media. Yeah, I'd love to hear from people.
And are you focusing on anything? I mean, just keeping going in the environment that we're in is its own battle at the moment. But is there a particular project that you're invested in right now, or that is on the horizon from you, that we could look out for?
I think I want to go back to the ESG conversation. And I feel it's been a very interesting journey for me that a couple of years ago, I would be working with organizations that had fallen foul of regulations and maybe had been caught out doing something unethical, and were now driven to kind of repair reputation. And they would invite me in as an afterthought. It was like, oh, we need to repair this. Now what I'm finding is that organizations that are already doing good, that the mindset is already in the ESG sort of social contract space, are reaching out and saying, we are, this is our purpose as an organization. These are our people. We want to enhance doing good. We're already on that trajectory. How do we do better? And so I think, I feel and I sense that I want to be putting my energy in that, because I feel it's going to be a really helpful ripple to getting people to think differently, and for the public to really come on board here and understand that people do speak up in their interest. So I want to be the bridge between ESG and speaking up in company purpose.
Fantastic. Listen, Wendy, I'm going to bring us to a close. So do stay on for a few moments after I press record, and I've just got to make sure I don't stop the Zoom call as opposed to stop the recording. But just on a personal note, thank you so much for taking the time to invest in a conversation with me. So I really do appreciate that.
Oh, and thank you, Guy, for inviting me, and also, it's an opportunity for me to learn too, and I've learned a lot from you. So thank you.
Very gracious. So listen, I'll just press the stop button, and hopefully you'll be here 3 seconds later. So we're done.